confirm we are now live, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the scrutiny meeting for Thursday the 19th of November. I hope you're all well. Apologies for absence. Item 1.
Chair, Councillor Custance, who has said they are not able to come, so there are no apologies.
Thank you. Is there any other apologies?
Just to say that Caroline Brown from the Labour group is trying to contact the meeting, but is still having technical difficulties. She is having to do so away from home because of a work pattern. So she's got an added difficulty with that.
Right, thank you. Hopefully she'll be able to join in a bit.
Hopefully, yeah.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Anybody got any declarations of interest? No. Thank you. We move on to agenda item 3, the minutes. So if we could just go through the minutes for accuracy, and if anybody's got any problems with it, then let me know. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. Thank you. Agenda item 4, Community Safety Partnership. I think this is Kat. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to share the contents of a presentation with you. So bear with me a second, and then if we can confirm that everyone can see it, that would be great. Okay. Chair, can you confirm that you can hear that you can see my screen?
I can, yes, thank you.
Super.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm here tonight to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the work streams of community safety. I think most of you know me, but just in case, my name's Catherine Thornhill. I manage the community safety team here at Erewash Borough Council. So, Erewash Borough Council has a requirement to have a scrutiny session looking at community safety on an annual basis. So that's the reason I'm here. Now, the past few years, we've asked Scrutiny to identify topics of interest. And this year, really, we couldn't ignore COVID. So I wanted to give you a bit of a snapshot on the impact of COVID on the work streams of my team. And we will go through a number of different bits and pieces, including antisocial behaviour. We'll be looking at organised crime and different types of crime, and also how we protect vulnerable people. Bit of a word of warning on this. This is initial insight into obviously quite a new situation, and this presentation covers a lot of initial thoughts and findings from a range of professionals working across Derbyshire in community safety. Obviously, I mean, it feels like COVID's been going on for a long time, and we feel like we've got an idea as to the impact this is having, but there's going to have to be a lot of extra work over the coming months, potentially into the next sort of couple of years, to understand the more longer term impact of the current situation. So have a look at antisocial behaviour. So what do we know? Well, we know at the moment that the force has seen an increase of 18%. So that's just over 6,000 additional calls. Now that's antisocial behaviour and calls relating to coronavirus. In Erewash, that equates to a 10% increase, and that's just over 400 additional calls. Forcewide and Erewash, we know from various meetings that we're all seeing various different types of ASB, particularly in sort of environmental crime, in neighbourhoods, in public spaces, and particular neighbour disputes increasing across the areas. And Erewash is no different with that. The first graph on the bottom, on the left-hand side, shows the antisocial behaviour and in particular the environmental side of things. So this includes noise-related inquiries, fly tipping, and anything that like that, you kind of environmental-based antisocial behaviour calls. And you can see on the graph, I've added some coloured lines in. The red lines indicate where lockdown has come into force. So these are national lockdowns. And you'll see there's one in March, and then obviously sort of middle of October where Erewash went into tier 2, and then in November where we've entered lockdown 2 nationally. The green lines show you where lockdown has started to be released. So you'll see a green line around May, and you'll also see one around July. And the amber coloured ones in September and October towards the between the green and the red show where restrictions started to come back into force. So on the environmental side of antisocial behaviour, we can see that there was an initial peak after the first lockdown came into force. And that is predominantly down to the fact that there was a lot of calls that would now be classified as COVID. Obviously, right at the beginning, when this all started in March, the force were very much kind of reacting as we all were. And a lot of the environmental calls did get kind of covered the COVID aspect now. Now they are separated out into a different classification now. So that does explain that peak. The middle graph shows you the antisocial behaviour that is classed as nuisance. So this is particularly ASB around parks, open spaces, and in predominantly gatherings as well. And you can see that there started to be an increase sort of just before the first lockdown. And you can see that it peaked just before May. And we believe that this was very much around the fact that lockdown had started, but people were starting to get in contact about stuff that was happening and things they were witnessing in those parks and open spaces and gatherings when that was under restriction. We also believe that there was a peak around May because we had the VE Day celebrations, and then obviously that dropped off as lockdown relaxed, as people were able and allowed to be out and about in public and open spaces. And you can see again sort of September, October time where the graph we started to see an increase in those types of calls where the restrictions were starting to come back into force. The graph on the right-hand side is looking at what we would class as personal antisocial behaviour. And you can see that the green line, which represents 2020, and the blue line, which represents last year of 2019, 2020 did see a decrease. A lot of that we would expect during winter. That people aren't out and about in the same ways. People are not out in gardens seeing other people, for example. So we do naturally see a decrease at that point. And obviously the beginning of the year, we were starting to see some really quite bad weather, if you remember, and also the start of the COVID restrictions as well. So, trying to unpick the trends and understand them is really interesting when you overlay the restrictions in the COVID side of things. Generally, we believe across antisocial behaviour that mental health related incidents have reduced. So a lot of the mental health calls that the police and ourselves get are quite often initially come in as antisocial behaviour. And we do know that some areas of vulnerability in our community have been hidden by the restrictions. A lot of people haven't been out and about in the same way that we would normally be, interacting with agencies, with others. So we know that some of these, as I say, these areas of vulnerability have definitely been hidden. We also know from anecdotal information from our healthcare colleagues that a lot more people seem to be going into A&E in a distressed state. So again, you know, people who would normally have access or feel that they would have access to services in a different way aren't able or don't feel able to access GPs, for example, or access friends and family for that support in the same way that they would normally. And it does feel as though people are going and ending up in a bigger crisis state, a different state, and having to go to A&E and receive that support. We've also seen some big changes around antisocial behaviour and the government rhetoric. For example, in September, the government, one of the government messages talked about wanting people to report breaches. So in September, we had the rule of 6. They wanted people to report neighbours where those breaches were being witnessed. And we know that changes your perceptions and your feelings in your local community, and particularly around your neighbours. I liken it to moving house, for example. When you decide you want to move house, you naturally detach emotionally from that property because you know you want to be moving on. And that's a natural process of going through that. Now, when you're being asked to look at your neighbours in a different way, or considering their actions and feeling as though they're not behaving as you are in relation to the lockdown restrictions and the COVID regulations, it starts to change your perception of that situation, and the longer it goes on, the harder it is to come back out the other side and to change that perception again. That, coming back to moving house, the harder it is to reattach emotionally with that property if you haven't moved. So I think for us, it's definitely looking at the impact that this is going to have more longer term. And certainly when you look at the ASB calls into our community safety team, we've seen the same trends across the months, where as the restrictions have come into force, people's tolerances has increased, recognising that a lot of people are at home in a different way, recognising that they're going to be seeing neighbours a lot more than they would normally, and recognising that things were very different. As lockdown has kind of changed and the restrictions have been relaxed, those calls have started to increase, that tolerance has changed, and that's definitely something that we're feeling within the team. We also know from our work that cases seem to be more complex. We know that the impact of antisocial behaviour seems to have been slightly more amplified. People are at home more. That we know that people are contacting us because there's issues when they're trying to work from home with their neighbours, or they've been at home more because they've been furloughed. People don't have that release in the same way. People don't have that break from their property, and that changes how people feel. And also combine that with the tolerance, it does change, the kind of calls that we will get into the community safety team. You can see as well on the right hand line chart, we have seen an increase in a range of calls. So, for example, the other category, the yellow bars, show you the different types of other contact that we get into the team, and that does include safeguarding. It's contact that isn't actually ASB. It also includes drug-related instances, but we also there is calls about breaches of social distancing in there as well. So we can see across the two slides that generally Erewash is following the same trends across as we're seeing across Derbyshire. Looking at crime, there has been, across the force, there's been a 9.2% increase, and across Erewash, that's a 3% increase. Now, a lot of that can be found in the public disorder and violence against person categories, and a lot of those increases are down to recording changes. Just over 18 months ago, the force changed the way that they record different types of public offences. So, for example, if there was a fight in the street and 3 people had witnessed that, previously there would probably be 1 crime for the fight, 1 incident logged, whereas now they would record 3 incidences. So that it does change the figures. This was expected when the recording changes were released, so it's not a surprise, but obviously it does change how the information is presented, and until we've got a good picture and a good amount of time since those recording changes have happened, obviously we can't compare trends in the same way. But as I say, certainly at this stage, it is something that we were expecting. Again, on here, you can see that there are quite a few different crime types that have seen a reduction. So, for example, theft, we've seen a reduction in robbery, we've seen a reduction in criminal damage. But also one of the biggest changes that we've seen is looking at serious acquisitive crime. As you would imagine, a lot of areas of our work, particularly around serious acquisitive, have been suppressed because of the ongoing restrictions. And serious acquisitive crime does include burglary and vehicle-related crime and robbery. Now, across the force, that is a 19% reduction, and 24 across Erewash. Now, a lot of that is because, say, when you're at home in a different way, you can see the graph shows the massive decrease through to March and April and May, but starting to see a gradual increase as lockdown measures were relaxed, sort of June, July time, as people started getting back out and about into our community. Obviously, at the moment, overall levels remain well below 2019 because of the significant changes that we've seen over this year. Again, this is something that was expected. So, you know, it's not a surprise to community safety professionals. When we're looking at protecting vulnerable people, there's a range of different work streams that we consider. So, for example, we've seen under the organised crime, we've had some information around online scams. So, as I'm sure you've seen in the news, there's been a surge in online crime, and I think a lot of that is because, you know, COVID has moved a lot of services onto the internet, and the use of the internet has changed massively over the last sort of 10 months, 11 months. So some of the scams have included COVID testing, where people have been contacted to pay extortionate amounts for a COVID test. There's been fake PPE contracts, as well as your normal kind of you know, parcels and online gambling scams, etc. So we have seen a change in the online side of things. We are expecting to see that level remain elevated over the next sort of few months. You know, obviously we're currently in another national lockdown. You know, there is an awful lot of, you know, Christmas shopping, for example, is having to be moved online. So it does give criminals the opportunity, unfortunately. So again, we're expecting to see that elevated. When we look at modern slavery, there has been an increase nationally over the last 5 years in referrals, which is something that expected in terms of thinking about the awareness raising that's happened around modern slavery, the recognition of the cases within particular areas. We did see a decrease in both adult and child referrals in the first quarter of 2020, as we would expect. Again, sort of April to June, people weren't out and about in communities in the same way, so they're not able to see things in the same way and make those referrals into the services. Again, as lockdown has relaxed, we've seen a slight increase again in quarter two, so from July onwards, but adult referrals have continued to decrease, and I think that very much comes into line with the changes in businesses and the impact that COVID has had on the business and retail world. When we look at domestic abuse is always a focus, but particularly during a pandemic where the message at the beginning, during lockdown 1, was very much everyone is required to stay at home. As you can see from the graph on screen, you can see that 45% of calls were COVID related during the full lockdown, and that as the regulations have been relaxed, you can see that those calls have reduced, and that's the same with domestic abuse. We have seen changes in that process, and currently 4-week trends suggest that the recorded domestic abuse incidents are at a similar level as the equivalent period in 2019, and that's probably not quite as many as we were expecting to have at this moment in time. We are seeing domestic abuse offences above 2019 levels, and certainly the kind of anecdotal evidence coming out from forces and partners suggests that this there does seem to be an increase in new victim and offender relationships. So obviously that, you know, we would expect those relationships that are already under strain, those relationships that people are already working with services, you know, what that's suggesting to us is that more people are coming forward, new relationships are coming to light that are struggling with the regulations and being in close proximity for a long period of time. We did see a spike in domestic abuse calls to the police the weekend after pubs reopened at the very beginning of July. But since then, fewer calls have been made at the weekend. And again, that links into the changes in the regulations and how things have changed in communities, and how the opportunity that people have to get in contact with support services. We do have some anecdotal information from some of our hospital colleagues, and there are some real positives. So with the COVID regulations, some healthcare settings are limiting people as they go in for health-related appointments. So for example, the person who is injured or needs treating is the only person allowed in to see a healthcare professional. And that actually does allow questions to be asked with potential victims as to how they sustain their injuries. And it gives us an opportunity to ask those questions that would normally be asked, but it gives us a little bit of an easier route in to ask those questions about whether there's anything that they need support with. So there are some real positives that can come out of this situation, and being able to signpost people into relevant support. And that's very much been one of the things from a CSP perspective, from our team, that we've wanted to make sure that people are aware that services are available still. Things are being delivered in a different way, but they are available, and people are more than able to hopefully get in contact and make those contacts where they've needed to. We have seen a lot more self-referrals, for example, for accommodation support. However, obviously, the increased demand has been for the services has been difficult to manage. We know that fewer clients are able to leave quickly from those services, so that changes the availability. Obviously, those services are not normally commissioned for a pandemic, so they've done some fantastic work across the county to make sure that they can respond to that increased demand. And certainly the Police and Crime Commissioner has put and the force have put additional funding into those community support services to make sure that they are geared up to be able to deal with it, the increase in demand. And that increase is likely to remain through to next year, and well into 2021 really. There has been an increase in the clients engaged with various domestic abuse support services since the lockdown. And we also know that a lot of the online crime and a lot of online incidents that have been reported, half of all those incidents are stalking and harassment, and a lot of that can be related back to domestic abuse relationships and that controlling and coercive behaviour. As I say, there's been a lot of work from different organisations and the community safety team to support residents to know that those services are still available if they want. And we know that people are ringing in and requesting that support in various ways. The helpline and the services have made different methods available to people to contact them. So that's been, a real success over this time. Looking at hate crime, as you can see, the graph shows that we have seen an increase across the force of 22%, and in Erewash that's 77%. during the initial lockdown, full lockdown, hate crime incidents and crimes reduced, as you'd imagine, as people weren't out and about over the weeks and the months. But as that relaxed, hate crime incidents and crimes have seen an increase, and we've seen a change in when people have actually called into services and called in to report issues, and that's been spread more evenly over the week, whereas normally it does tend to be at weekends. And Erewash has followed all of these patterns. Again, we talk about tolerance, tolerance of other cultures, tolerance of how people are working, potentially being out and about in a different way in communities, working from home, potentially people who aren't working generally in communities. So it has changed. One of the things that was particularly evident at the beginning of lockdown was, from a professional perspective, there was a real concern that particular people would be targeted. So, for example, Chinese people, as the issues around COVID started to become apparent, and there was a lot of work that happened during those initial months of 2020 to make sure that people were supported in communities, and that community tension was, trying to resolve that community tension. We also know that our LGBT communities, there was a national report. We know that they have felt more isolated and hidden. We know that they feel supported, and they spend a lot of time in our nighttime economies. And obviously that's not been possible in the same way this year. However, there have been a lot of positives, and we know that from this national report that a lot of people have made those links online and found new ways of linking into those support services and, connecting with local communities. So I think it's a real positive that people have adapted to the situation. From our perspective, one of the significant areas of work for my team is looking at children at risk of exploitation. So that's both criminal and sexual. And this graph shows you the total number of contacts received into Starting Point. So that's the helpline, the Intercall Derbyshire, that specifically deals with young people. Now you can see in the middle, around April, there was a significant dip at the beginning, and obviously that coincided with the beginning of the full lockdown. And that contact has gradually increased as lockdown has been released up until July. Again, another drop off during August, but then a significant increase again in September and back into October. We know that a lot of that is down to schools returning. So we know that those hidden harms that have been suppressed and hidden in communities and families has been brought to light a little bit more as children have gone back into school and education settings. And the referrals, when you break the referrals down by agency, the agency of referral, you can see that trend is there, and schools have really started to refer young people in and families for that support. We know that this whole situation around COVID has had a massive impact on families and children. And the impact has been felt in a number of different ways. And schools are, whilst obviously continued to have contact with those most vulnerable families, it wasn't able to be undertaken entirely in the same way. And that does show the change in referral rates for the beginning of the new school year. We also know that we normally see seasonal changes, and they do seem to be suppressed at the moment. So, for example, with children's sexual exploitation, we normally see a reduction through July. And obviously, you can see from the graph on screen that wasn't the case this year. And again, this is very much linked into the impact of COVID and the fact that a lot of situations have been pushed online, and that contact is happening in a different way. there is a huge concern about those hidden harms, and I know that there's been a number of different campaigns nationally to look at how families and children and young people have been affected by all of this, particularly around education. There's been a lot of work around free school meals and supporting families to cope with financial concerns, you know, and that is very much ongoing across the districts and across the across Derbyshire itself. We know as well that drug and alcohol concerns have been changed, and that obviously impacts on families as well. We know from national reports that with some people, they seem to have drank more, particularly if furloughed or not working, as you know, they don't have the same purpose. Others seem to have taken stock and given people a chance to kind of look internally and you know, seek that help and to change behaviours. So there have been, you know, significant changes generally with people. We also know that job security and funding and finances for families and adults is a concern for a lot of people. We know that drug and alcohol habits can be expensive, so I think people have really had an opportunity to look at where they spend money and what they're doing, and that has had an impact on the drug and alcohol consumption across what appears to be across the country. There is some idea that during lockdown, drug consumption has changed. Certainly from our perspective, I would suggest that this hasn't gone away. People have very much found different ways to access the things that they feel they need. And particularly with cannabis use, for example, we have seen an increase in reporting of cannabis use as people struggle to cope with the demands of COVID and the restrictions and the change in lifestyle. So again, you know, just anecdotal from national reports and national surveys looking at the type of work that's been happening across the country. So in summary, the pandemic has definitely changed the situation for people. We've seen an enhancement of vulnerabilities in communities. There's lots of pressures, lots of different pressures being put onto individuals and families, and that changes how people are able to cope with situations and how they deal with things. We also know that many vulnerabilities have been hidden by the situation, although there has been an awful lot of work with all of the different agencies to try and provide that support to our communities and to our individuals. Again, you know, for me, it's also a chance to look at the good news stories. There are positives to come out of this. You know, I've seen from a professional perspective, massively positive change in relationship. If anything, they have been enhanced with this new way of working. You know, the fact we're all sat around in different prospective locations on a Teams meeting, you know, there have been new ways of working, and that has had its positives. And I'm, you know, generally really proud of agencies for coming together, finding those new ways. For example, around children at risk of exploitation, during lockdown, we've started new mapping meetings to pull that information from schools together with our partners from DTC. You know, and that is something that, whilst we tried to start before lockdown, didn't happen in the same way. So, you know, there have been some really positive ways of working and different ways. And the other thing is actually communities have really been rallying around and supporting each other. We do a lot of work and have a lot of contact with Stella Scott from Erewash CVA, and you know, the stuff that's happened, particularly during lockdown 1, where communities have come together and supported everybody, has been absolutely phenomenal, really, and actually, you know, has helped people to still feel connected with those communities, still feel connected with individuals, and people have been able to ask for that support where they've needed to, which has been so important. I'll pass it back over to Angelica and to the chair. That's the end of my presentation, so I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Kat, for such a in-depth, very in-depth, interesting report. I mean, it's shown us what the CSP have been doing throughout COVID, which has been a very difficult time for everybody. I have seen a request from Kevin Miller whether he could have a copy of the slides that you've produced, presumably in a paper copy. Unfortunately, they are quite small and I find it difficult reading everything. So I don't know whether all the members would want to do the same so they can digest the information a little bit better.
Yep, I can certainly send that out to. I'll put those attached to the minutes.
Yeah, I don't know then anybody else. Councillor Flood would like to ask a question. Councillor Flood.
No questions here. I was just saying that I'd like a copy of the slides as well. It'd be very useful. Thank you.
I think that's probably the best way for people to read more in depth, and they can take it in more, and then they can always ask a question at a later date. Is everybody happy with that? I assume so. Yep. Right. Agenda item 5, safeguarding. I think it's somebody that's just been speaking.
Sorry, you're going to have to listen to me again, aren't you?
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, I just wanted to, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to give you a bit of a quick update on where we are. I know this is a topic that members are really keen to be part of. And I know we've a number of updates and given you an idea as to kind of where we expect to go with this. COVID has changed our timescale slightly. I was hoping to have got some of the information out a bit sooner this year, but unfortunately, as with everything, COVID has put a stop to things in a different, changed timescales, but it hasn't changed the work that's been ongoing. So, as you may remember, we talked about the safeguarding policy. So there was some minor updates made to the policy, and it was signed off under our constitution by the lead member. There is also a planned full rewrite of our policy, and if members remember back to the previous update, there was across the county a district forum meeting where the safeguarding leads from all the district councils, along with representatives from all of the other agencies that are involved in safeguarding, and representatives from the Adult Safeguarding Board and the Children's Safeguarding Partnership come together and talk about the issues that are very specific to district and borough councils. There was a task and finish group planned, and that was due to meet in April to look at the district boroughs' safeguarding policies and look at where recommendations could be made to pool resources. There was the recognition that, you know, a lot of us are in cycles of refreshing our policies, and actually for the most part they contain similar information. We're all referring to the same organisations. We have similar information about what we're looking out for, the types of abuse and the symptoms and the signs that we're looking out for as well. So very much looking at trying to make sure that we could share and pool those resources where we can. There have been a couple of meetings with a few. I actually sit on that task and finish group, and we've had a couple of meetings now to look at a structure of a policy, and that has featured some of the good work that we've got of our safeguarding policy, our existing safeguarding policy, and work's progressing really nicely. This will obviously feed into the full rewrite of our policy, which will happen over the next 6-9 months. There is going to be a bit of a change. We are linking into something I like to call the 5 R's. So utilising and borrowing with pride something from another district. There's a 5R process is looking at how officers and members can come together and deal with a safeguarding process if they need to. And this goes through the process of recognising what safeguarding concerns are, what you might come across, responding, how you respond appropriately to those, recording what you've been told, what you've heard, what you've seen, reporting that and talking to the right people, and then referring that where appropriate to different organisations where required. So that will feature throughout all of the work that we're doing around safeguarding, and I really feel positive this is a positive change for us, because it gives an easy way to make sure that people can deal with a safeguarding issue. Alongside the change in policy, I'm also looking at updating the information on the intranet to make it easier and simpler for people to access, and it will have links to all the documents, both the policy and the referral form. I've also been working really hard with our personnel team to update the training that is available for both officers and members. So there will be a new module launched on adult safeguarding, and also one on children and young people. Originally, I was looking at two modules on each, one for officers and counsellors. And actually, going through it, I realised that we just didn't need that distinction. You know, the information we need to provide to counsellors is exactly the same as officers. You need to know the same sort of things about what you might recognise and what you might see, how to respond, how to record those, and who to talk to if you need to. So they are currently being finalised. I've also been speaking to colleagues from our Derbyshire County Council training teams, and the modules have gone through them for quality assurance, and that reassurance has been provided that they contain what they should do and cover all the main parts. One of the other aspects that we wanted to get right was making sure that the awareness raising was undertaken physical resources, and I don't know if anybody's seen them, but there are posters, big posters around the council buildings that give this snapshot on what to look for and how to deal with things. We've been updating these and they will be going out over the next few weeks across the different council buildings, but will also be available on the intranet as well, so that people can find them if they are working at home, and for councillors as well. The plan is to launch this to staff in December, so I always wanted to make sure that we've got a suite of updated information, and that's all going to be coming out. From my perspective, that's it. I'll certainly take questions if there are any.
Right, thank you. Is there any questions on the safeguarding? No. And just one question I'd like to ask: the posters that are around the council buildings, do we offer the supermarkets things like that so they can display them?
Not particularly. The posters are very internally focused, so it talks about the safeguarding leads, the officers that are there for the council and for members to contact. So it's not necessarily something that we would share more widely. Obviously, there's a lot of resources on Derbyshire County Council for sort of external routes. We will be looking at how we share information to the public about how they share concerns around safeguarding, but at the moment I wanted to get the information right for those people working on behalf and representing the council, and looking internally first.
Right, thank you very much. I think you can have a rest now. Nobody's put the name up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time.
Agenda item 6, housing options on your report.
Yeah, that's me, Chair.
Hello, Nick.
Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good, excellent. This is the activity report, and we changed the format of the report, Chair, if you recall, from quarterly updates to an annual update. So this is the first report of that new reporting cycle, and it covers the period 1st of October 2019 to 30th of September 2020. Now, during that period, the Housing Options team opened 1,882 new cases for people seeking assistance on a range of housing issues, and also on homelessness issues as well. Now, of those 1,882 new cases, homeless duty was accepted in 334 of those cases. And if you look at table 1 on page 5, Chair, that does break down by duty type what approaches were made to us. With regard to those 334 cases accepted, table 2 on page 6 summarises the reasons why approaches were made to us in the first place. And again, there's a common trend that was being reported in previous reports, which does demonstrate that the end of private rented sector tenancies does remain one of the most frequent reasons why the council does receive approaches from people. And that might not be because they are homeless, but there is always the threat when people are in the process of losing a tenancy that they tend to approach the council with a view to getting further advice on what they can do. Now, during the year, the Housing Options team closed 348 cases, and the outcomes are summarised in Table 3. And I think, Chair, one of the points I would just like to draw members' attention to is really the importance of social housing and supported accommodation providers in providing a long-term housing solution to people who are facing homelessness and other housing difficulties. During the year, we had 140 households who were placed into temporary accommodation. And as the report says, Chair, this is quite a significant increase compared to the previous 12 months. And that does reflect the impact of the coronavirus lockdown, particularly at the peak of the lockdown. We saw an enormous increase in the number of cases that we were having to deal with. And that was partly because of the government's everybody in message and imperative that they wanted all councils to bring homeless people and people who are rough sleeping, bring them into accommodation, regardless of their priority need. So as a consequence of that, Erewash, along with all the other councils in Derbyshire, did see quite a spike in terms of the number of people that we held in temporary accommodation during that peak period. Table 4B summarises how many clients left temporary accommodation during the year. And again, in the majority of cases, we always aim to try and keep people in temporary accommodation for the shortest period possible. And as the table demonstrates, the Housing Options team managed to do that in the majority of cases, and the overwhelming majority were in temporary accommodation for less than a month, which is quite a significant achievement for the team to move people on from temporary accommodation to more settled and permanent accommodation. That's all I'd say at this stage, Chair. Happy to take any questions from members of the committee.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, I think it reads very well, especially the 58 sorted within the month. And that's very good. Are there any questions from members? Can't believe this. Right, thank you. We go on to agenda item 7, rough sleeper service, which is on pages 9 to 14.
Well, thank you, Chair. So this really provides members with an overview of the new rough sleeper service that has been introduced across Derbyshire, and Erewash acted as a lead authority in terms of bidding for funds from central government. But just to give a little bit of a context, following the publication of the government's National Rough Sleeping Strategy, Erewash did act as a lead authority on behalf of the 7 Derbyshire districts and also Staffordshire Moorlands, which has a strategic alliance with one of the other councils in Derbyshire. And Erewash acted as the lead authority to apply for government funding to support the delivery of the new rough sleeper service. As the report explains, the bids were successful and the partnership received a total of just over £554,000, which again was quite a significant and substantial amount. But again, I think it reflected the importance that central government placed on joined up and combined services and joined up approaches to providing homelessness services. So that did curry some significant favour with MHCLG at the bidding process. In very broad terms, the service is split into 2 distinct areas. There's an operational side and there's a more strategic side. The operational element of the service is currently provided by a commission service provider, which in this case is the P3 charity. And they were appointed following a competitive tendering process and are providing both an outreach service and also floating support for rough sleepers who find themselves in temporary accommodation or more permanent accommodation. And the objective is that the floating support will help ensure that those individuals retain and hold on to that accommodation for a longer period. The more strategic element of the service has been set up to review existing services and also to look at developing pathways to assist rough sleepers find more settled accommodation. And to do that, 2 rough sleeper coordinators have been appointed, one based in Erewash and one based in Chesterfield. So there's a coverage of the county, both north and south. The service became fully operational in January, and as you can imagine, setting up this kind of service where there is no similar comparable service across Derbyshire was quite a significant challenge to the partnership. And as the report points out, there were some challenges, particularly in relation to the commissioning of the of P3, which was done through a competitive tendering process, which Erewash was the lead authority for that as well. And I'm pleased to say that that was a very robust process, and we were successful in appointing P3. I think one of the significant factors that's dominated the new service inevitably has been the coronavirus pandemic. And as you can imagine, within 3 months of the service going live, we were faced with considerable pressures on services across the whole county in terms of rough sleepers and homeless cases that we were required to help and support. And I think what has been a very significant factor is that P3 has provided the districts with considerable support to help rough sleepers and vulnerable homeless to ensure that they are accommodated during the peak of the pandemic. To focus in on Erewash, we had 45 households that were placed into temporary accommodation between 23rd of March and the 12th of June, which is unprecedented in terms of our normal levels of temporary accommodation and people in temporary accommodation. And because of the government's imperative, we were required to put people into temporary accommodation regardless of their priority need. So it was just a case of making sure everybody who approached us, who is in need and in a vulnerable situation, was provided with accommodation. And of those 45 households, 22 people have received support directly from P3 to help sustain permanent accommodation. And this is on top of the work that the Housing Options team in Erewash is doing as well. So it was a huge bonus and support to have the extra capacity and the extra skill that P3 provided to help us through that very, very difficult period. Outside the peak of the first wave of the pandemic, Table 1 summarises the headline outcomes delivered by the service up to September 2020. And paragraph 3.10 of the report summarises the work that's been undertaken by the rough sleeper coordinators at a more strategic level rather than at a frontline operational level. Continuing the service beyond the 31st of March 2021 will be very much dependent on the government providing more funding. They have made a commitment that more funding will be available and will be provided, and it will be a bidding process that we have to go through again. The likelihood is that the second bidding round will be led by another authority in Derbyshire, and Erewash will just play a part in terms of helping with the evaluation of bids and being part of the governance arrangements to ensure that any new service is run correctly and effectively, certainly as the service is currently being run through P3. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, from any members who might have any queries at all to raise.
Thank you, Nick. Just one question from me. I've been searching through the P3 charity. What does it stand for?
P3. I'm not sure actually. I think it is short for something, but I couldn't tell you what it is offhand. I'd have to go onto the website to find out.
Right, thank you.
Chair, I think it's something like people, possibilities and potential, isn't it?
Yes, Kat, well done. That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's why the 3 Ps, yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
At the moment, I've just had one question. I don't know whether Councillor Miller wants to ask it himself.
Thank you, Nick, for your presentation. Do you know how many of these rough sleepers are ex-servicers? And are all rough sleepers men, or do you have any women?
I'm not aware that any of the rough sleepers that we've had any contact with are ex-forces, and I can confirm that we have a combination of both male and female clients who find themselves rough sleeping. So it's not just one exclusive to one particular sex.
Thank you, Councillor Mer. Could I ask Councillor Dawson would like to speak?
Thank you, Chair, and yes, thanks, Nick. And it's nice to see you back at Scrutiny. Really, I suppose this is a question that's a crossover between your area and Cat's. As we've seen the success of the rough sleeping strategy in reducing homelessness, is anybody keeping any data in the crossover between rough sleepers and antisocial behaviour? Because obviously I know, you know, in some areas a lot of antisocial behaviour, or what would be classed as antisocial behaviour, is caused by people if they're homeless and they're aggressively begging and things like that. So I'm just wondering if that data was being collated at all. Thank you.
I think I'll let Kat answer that one.
I thought that might be the case. Thank you, Nick. Councillor Dawson, I would agree completely. A lot of the behaviour that comes as a result can be classed as antisocial behaviour, whether that's urinating, for example, in certain areas, whether that's begging, etc. So we would collate information on contact into our service, but we would also bring the partnership in. So we would want to talk to our police safer neighbourhood contacts, because they would be out and about. We talk to wardens, as well as then making sure that we refer into the services that we need to. So obviously speaking to the housing options team, speaking to the Derbyshire outreach team if we need to. So that the data is not collated in an easy way because of the crossover. It tends to be collated as contact into particular teams, but we would deal with it in a partnership way.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Custance.
Yes, thank you. I'm intrigued. What does OJEU stand for? Page 10, it says £4, but it should be 3.6.
It stands for the Official Journal of the European Union.
Right, because it's not written anywhere in here, you see. Thank you.
Well done, Nick. You've evened things up now. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nick, and previously thanks, Kat, for both of those reports, all of those reports, I should say. So it looks like great work's being done on tackling homelessness in Erewash, which is really good to see, and the funding that's come down from government is being put to good use. I think I might be misreading this, but I just wanted to ask a question about page 13, 5.3, and it's about the continuation of the scheme. Obviously, so it was initially for 1 year up to the 31st of October 2020. Am I reading this right? It includes provision for one extension up to 12 months, and it's been extended for 5 months up to the 31st of March. Now you're hoping that more funding will come on board after the 31st of March. Does that mean we can't extend it again, but we're going to have to somehow start a new project after the 31st of March, or am I misreading that? Thank you.
No, you've understood it correctly, Councillor Fletcher. This, I'm afraid, is part of the problem that we have with central government funding. It's never straightforward in actually getting access to the funding, and because of the value of funding that we're talking about, there's always an element of procurement that we need to follow. We need to follow official process and procedure in relation to the procurement of the services, and that does come with certain conditions. And the route that we took to actually procure P3 service was through a particular OJEU route that allowed us to procure that service, but that does have a limit in terms of the amount of the total amount of funding that can be used to extend the service, and also the actual length of time that that service can be funded. But one of the other key elements to this is that the funding that we have will take us to the end of March next year, and really any extension to the current service will be very much dependent on whether or not there is additional funding that's made available to us as part of the next bidding round. But the intention is, and the view from government is that they are going to make more funds available, because clearly the service that we're providing and a lot of other councils and regions are providing is supporting the national rough sleeping strategy, and is providing a very important element to making sure that government policy is being implemented on that basis. So we are expecting there to be further funding released in the coming weeks, but of course that will, because again of the value of the funding that we're likely to be offered and receive, if we are successful, that again is going to require a significant tendering process that has to comply with contract procedure rules. The likelihood is that, say, another council, as I mentioned earlier, will be leading on that. But I think the intention is that we will be able to extend the current service that we're providing, but a new enhanced service is likely to be provided beyond the 31st of March 2021, if we're able to secure the funding from government and we're able to submit a specification that is acceptable to central government. So that's probably quite a long-winded answer to your question, but it's a complicated process, I'm afraid, and I think a lot of officers have probably sprouted several more grey hairs in the process of actually being able to secure the funding. But it's quite a complex process that we have to go through. But I'm hoping that we'll get additional funding and be able to extend the current service, and also then enhance it and bring a new service to the county.
Thank you. I hope so too. You're doing a great job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Dawson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points, Nick. The first one I think I probably know the answer to, but I'll ask it anyway. Obviously, after January, we will have exited the transition period of the EU, which I would assume means that the procurement rules that we would have to go through or have been through will undoubtedly change. Do we know yet how that is going to potentially affect a new tender and a new tendering process? Have government given us any idea on that? And secondly, you mentioned about the additional government funding and hopefully bidding for that. If the need for the service is still there and we are unsuccessful from getting any more government funding, is there any conversations amongst the Derbyshire authorities at the moment of how we can possibly keep the service going amongst ourselves, whether that is pooling? I mean, for example, I know that all authorities in Derbyshire at the minute pool their business rates, and that is useful. Are conversations happening around, is there a possibility where, each authority puts in and pools money together to continue the service if we don't get any government funding? Thank you.
Well, the answer to your first question, Councillor Dawson, around the tendering process, because a lot of the European legislation has been transposed into UK legislation, the likelihood is that the procedures that we need to go through currently under ODU rules will simply continue under UK procurement legislation. So I'm not expecting, and I'm not being advised by our own procurement team in Erewash, that there's likely to be any visible changes in the way that we go about major procurements for contracts and services of this value. So I'm not expecting that to be a problem for us. In terms of the question over the funding for the future, I suppose there's a quiet optimism amongst the county that because the service that is currently provided has been met with a great deal of favour from central government, and we do have a dedicated officer from MHCLG who we have been in very close contact with, and because this is a joint service that's been provided and has been provided across the whole county region, region. That does curry a great deal of support with MHCLG. So there is a quiet optimism that when new funding round is released, that we feel that we're probably in a very good position to be successful. But you can't count your chickens and you can't guarantee anything at this stage. But the feedback that we've had from MHCLG has been very positive up till now. So I'm not anticipating that that we're not going to be in a very strong position perhaps to get additional funding. I think the nature and the shape of the service will be different because I think what we want to, or what the county wants to do, is to enhance the ongoing support for people who find themselves in accommodation. And we need to put in an extra tier, I think, of support to support those individuals once they have accommodation, to ensure that they actually sustain that accommodation for the long term. And it's not just, and they don't end up then returning back to the streets or become homeless again. So, but that, as you'll all appreciate from previous discussions we've had, a lot of people who experience homelessness do have significant complex issues that needs to be dealt with, and it's not just the work that the council can do. It's a multi-agency approach that requires mental health support, public health, and social care. So and that's really the element that we're looking to try and enhance with the existing service to provide that more holistic approach to supporting people once they find themselves with a long-term accommodation solution.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. So I'd just like to thank Kat and Nick for coming and talking to us and giving us a lot of information to sink in. Thank you. Right, we move on to agenda item 8, the Bramcote Bereavement Services Joint Committee, pages 15 to 16. So I think this is more for information than anything. Is there any councillors that want to make any comment on it? Nobody? Thank you. Right, we now move on to agenda item 9, which is the work programme. I don't know, because there's an item on here that's got to have the exclusion of the press and public, whether that is something that needs to be done now. Could I ask Angelica?
Just to clarify, Chair, Councillor Dawson did have a question on agenda item 8.
Sorry, we'll go
yeah.
back.
All right, no problem.
Right.
Sorry,
Councillor Dawson, sorry about that.
That's all right. It's just a quick question. I know at the last meeting we'd mentioned about inviting the bereavement services manager from Bramcote to perhaps come and talk to us and just explain more about the service. I'm just wondering if we'd got any further with that at all.
Hi, I haven't actually approached the manager, but I will do after this meeting. So hopefully be able to sort out time and date for you very soon for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
just to
Councillor
clarify, Chair, you don't need to exclude the press and public. That's a set of minutes from the Bramcote Bereavement Services.
I didn't know that on the last item.
No, you're all right. We're straight on to the work programme. Would you like me to take over for
Have my
that?
fingers wrapped.
No, it's not a problem.
Right, yes, we'll go on to the work programme, please.
Right, members, at the last meeting, we did make quite a few changes to the work programme and had changed the focus to look around the COVID-19 issues. The report that I've sent out gives you an update in 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4 of all the actions that have been taken so far. As you'll be aware, Vision Derbyshire, there's an additional meeting taking place next Wednesday with the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive who will be attending to talk you through that. The work programme has been updated on page 21 to have additional items in that were requested. For example, the core strategy, which will be coming in January. And I've also included the updates on task and finish. We were scheduling a meeting for the water safety, but unfortunately, due to the lockdown happening again now, the head of service in question is rather busy again. So as soon as he has more availability, I will rearrange that. And that's really the update that I've got in front of you. And you've got the forward plan of key decisions as well for the next period.
Yeah. Going to the forward plan, Councillor Dawson asked a question at the last meeting, which I didn't actually speak to you about, but I wondered if there was an idea from members how they'd like to proceed with the forward plan, if we could have some people to put their ideas forward, please.
I think if I remember correctly, Chair, it was more a case of doing pre-decision scrutiny that the request was last time. Now, what I'm quite happy to do is do a minute standing referred from today's meeting saying that the Scrutiny Committee would like the Council Executive to consider any items that it would like the Scrutiny to review before they actually get to a decision stage. I don't know. It's up to members how you'd like to progress on that. The forward plan is literally the key decisions being taken by the Council Executive in the future.
Yeah. Just call on Tony Sangari. Speak, please.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Yeah. Hi, Chair. Thank you. I just want to talk about the best way forward to me is scrutiny, the executive and the key decisions of the council. It would be for us to invite I think personally, instead of going around the houses, we just invite the lead member and the relative officer to the meeting. So to report their portfolio, I think ask the questions to the committee. For example, I would think that, the budget time, say, would you ask Councillor Major and Mr. Sankey to come and talk to us about the budget and ask questions? I think it's just simple that if there's any issues, we just ask them to come, we ask the questions and we move forward.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Sangari. Is there Councillor Dawson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, Angelica is right with what I'd asked before. Obviously, we know with the forward plan when the decisions are obviously being planned to be taken, so April, December, etc., etc. And I know we don't have many call-ins on our authority, but it was just around, whether there is any pre-decision scrutiny that the executive would like us to look at moving forward, and then we can do that. And obviously then, as Councillor Sangera said, then we can call in obviously the lead member and relevant officer for that. And I just think it gets members more involved. It takes some of the pressure off of the executive as well. And in theory, you get better policy decisions coming out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Jerry Icton, please. Councillor Icton. Hello.
Hiya, sorry, I was trying to unmute my mic. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to second what Councillor Sangera suggested. I think it makes absolute sense to invite the members of the exec in at relevant times. It's going to cut the amount of time it's going to take to raise questions, because we can ask the questions in real time rather than having to ask a question and then go away to ask the question, come back with the answer. It's going to cut the time in half, so I think it makes a lot of sense. And it'll make them more visible to us as well. So I think it's a great suggestion. So yeah, absolutely second that.
Right, thank you. Councillor Custance, please.
Oh, hello. I'd like to add my vote to that, because both Tony and Jerry have said what I agree with, and I think that it's a good idea to invite them to us so we can ask questions of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Custance. Is there anybody else who wants to ask any questions?
Chair, could I ask just for a point of clarification?
Yeah.
Councillor Sanghera suggested the budget process, budget setting process,
Mhm.
which takes place quite late on at this council. Is he suggesting that we invite Councillor Major and the the Director of Resources to the meeting when the draft budget's gone out? Can I just have some clarification on that, please? Or was that just an example?
Yes, thank you. And
Sorry,
that was just example of, that was just example. Sorry, it just
That's fine.
It could be other debates that we need to do. That's just an example that I gave. Sorry, yeah.
No, that's absolutely fine. I didn't want to put anything in the minutes.
No.
And suddenly find I got it wrong.
I did clarify that it was just an example of, if it was the budget, then Councillor Major and Mr. Sankey would come. If it's something else, then the lead team and the executive would come into that meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do agree with Councillor Sanghera. This is a better way of scrutinising the executive. If the executive, they're there to create council policy along with the full council, and with the forward plan, it can be scrutinised when they've made their decision. I think otherwise you've got a danger of making a parallel executive of scrutiny. So I don't think personally that's the way to go forward in the way that Councillor Dawson says. I think doing what Councillor Sanghera says is a far better way of doing it, and it's more personable to the councillors that can ask questions of the executive. And I would see it being put in place on a rota basis, where when there is anything that is like for instance, the core strategy, where at a meeting where that is the top topic, so to speak, that the lead member, which is Mike Powell, and the head of planning, obviously Steve Birkinshaw, would come in to speak to us. So I think it's more putting a new item that will come up on a rota system on a regular basis, not a one-off. Thank you. Does Councillor Miller want to speak? Sorry, Councillor Miller?
No, just offering my support to Councillor Sanghera.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, are all members happy to do this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Councillor Dawson would like to speak first.
Thanks, Chair. That's fine. All I would ask then on that point is basically what is the purpose of the scrutiny committee, other than just asking random questions about to executive members about their portfolio. Scrutiny isn't and never has been a shadow or separate executive. The executive is there pre-decision scrutiny, and I think this is where we need to clarify. And I know when we've had this debate before. Basically, the executive wants to take a decision. It comes to the scrutiny committee and says, this is what we are going to look at. We're going to make a decision on this at some point in the future. It comes to scrutiny. We hash it out. We look at it. We think that might work. That might not work. This will be better. We improve it before it then goes to the executive for a decision. The only other way we get to talk about it after the decision has been made is via a call-in, which obviously is time limited. You've got 7 days from the decision being made to it being called in. Now, that takes a lot of time on officers to prepare all of that if there was a call-in meeting. With pre-decision scrutiny, and it's nothing new. There's countless authorities across the country that do pre-decision scrutiny. It actually works better. So if we look at the forward plan, at the moment. We've got on there the disposal of council-owned land, minute number 8873. Now, the executive will make the decision on that next week or the week after. For example, it's too short now, but for example, that is something that as a scrutiny committee we could have looked at, and we could have said, is that the best use of what to do with the land? Is it right to dispose of it for the council, or is there another use that we could have think of to generate it? And we could put those proposals then into the executive. Now, that doesn't mean that the executive have to accept that, but it does mean that it's been through a process in which it's not just the executive that's looking at it, it's allowed more members to look at it and have their input on it. And hopefully, whatever that final decision is going to be would be better than perhaps it would have been if it hasn't gone through pre-scrutiny decision making. So, you know, we've got to get away from this view that scrutiny is somehow hostile to the executive. It isn't, and it shouldn't be. It is there as a friend to the executive to help the executive and allow members to represent their views. So, yeah, by all means, invite executive members in to scrutiny and let us question them. But let's have a purpose to that particular questioning. So, yeah, if we're looking at the core strategy, let's have Mr. Birkinshaw and Councillor Powell come before us, and we can ask them questions on that because it's relevant to that portfolio. I think if we just suddenly start randomly inviting members of the executive to come and talk to us, you know, there's no structure to the meeting. You know, what exactly would they be there for? What would they be there to answer? You know, and I think we'd get lost by doing that. So let's try and structure it a bit more, really, is what I would urge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. I never said anything about random. They would be invited on the issues that are important at that time. That is why I said the core strategy. That is not random at all. And I don't think we've got a full council that actually votes on everything that the executive does. So individual members do get a say at the full council of all sides of the chamber. So I still think what Councillor Sangaria said is the best way forward, and I am not in favour of pre-scrutiny on executive things. Thank you. Anybody else got anything to say?
Yes, I'd like to speak.
Hold on a minute, Councillor Flood. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as Councillor Dawson says, invite members of the executive by all means, but pre-scrutiny is vital. Pre-scrutiny is something now that we're doing at the county, and it works very, very well. We're doing a piece of work on the scrutiny committee yesterday, a scrutiny working group. We had a good discussion. Things are now being fed back. The decision hasn't been made yet, obviously, that's why it's pre-scrutiny. And I think it's very, very useful to get the feeling of another body like the scrutiny committee into decision making. So, and I think that's makes for better decisions being made, rather than just having executive members. We've done it at the county that we've had cabinet members, they just give a report, away they go, and it's forgotten. But doing it this way, the scrutiny committee is taking a role in it, a physical role in making the decision along with the executive. It works very, very well, believe me. I support it. I support Councillor Dawson.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm much newer to this than most people here. I'm very aware of that, but I do admit to a bit of that kind of existential doubt about this committee. You know, there's not been much comment at all tonight, and in most of the scrutiny committee meetings that I've been to, there's been very little, probably a bit more than tonight, to be fair, but not too much comment by members of the committee. And yet scrutiny, it seems to me, is such an important thing. We did some training on it when I was after the election, after I was elected for the first time, and it was made very clear to me that scrutiny of all the committees is not political. It's about being a critical friend to the council. It's about making sure that decisions are made well and are interrogated and are checked. And it just seems to be that, I mean, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I'm not convinced that that's what we're doing at the moment. And it seems that this other way of working, why can't we give it a try and see if we feel that we're having a better impact on some of the decisions that are being made, and we're being the critical friend that we were told in that training we were supposed to be. So that my point is to support what Councillor Dawson has proposed.
Right, thank you. Does anybody else want to speak?
Yes, please.
Right, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't make the chat stay on my screen, so I had to put my hand up. I was under the impression that one of the major purposes of the statutory guidance was that we were supposed to begin to scrutinise policy while it was being formed, rather than when it's already been formed. And that's really important because it enables us to have a more critical friend bipartisan approach. Because in all honesty, once a policy has been published and we're in the council chamber, that conversation is much more difficult to influence and for people to change their mind once we've got to that point. And the whole purpose of the statutory guidance, or a huge chunk of the purpose of the statutory guidance, was for us to look at policy as it was formed. So we certainly shouldn't be, I think we might be breaking the guidance, in fact, which I'm sure we will talk about next week, if we were to say we weren't going to do pre-scrutiny. That seems very concerning to me. And I'm very grateful that Steve is coming along to allow some pre-scrutiny on the housing options. Thank you. Sorry, the core strategy for the housing.
Thank you. Is there anybody else got any opinions on this? Right. Well, I personally see that Councillor Zangari's proposal replaces having a proposal on pre-scrutiny, so members need to make up their mind on it. No.
Can I just ask?
Do you want to vote on this?
Well, can I just ask you what exactly we would be voting on? Because it was already a given with scrutiny committees that we can invite executive members to come and talk to us. That's already that is already in the constitution. So really, it's what are we voting on? Are we deciding on what we want them to come and talk to us about, or not? That's what I'm. The exec members will come if we ask them anyway. So that's already there. What are we actually voting on?
We're talking about making the executive accountable as lead members to come and talk to us at our request on subjects where it hasn't been before. It may have been our right, but it hasn't been done before. So to be a rota from now on, where they come in, so you'd know what was happening, you'd be able to ask the questions direct to them. And I think this would work a lot better than pre-scrutiny of things that are passed down. You've already said yourself, Councillor Dawson, that there's no reason to take any notice. but surely when somebody is there and you can speak face to face, it gives a better result. Thank you. Councillor Flood. Councillor Flood.
Thank you, Chair. You can do all these things. You can't just kick pre-scrutiny into the long grass tonight. Pre-scrutiny is something that's emerging. The last scrutiny was the, I think it was the national one, or rather at Rushcliffe Borough Council some time ago. Pre-scrutiny then was just emerging. What pre-scrutiny does, it gives you a physical input as the decision's being made. Of course, we can invite cabinet members, exec members, whatever I like to call them on this authority, to give an account of themselves. We can ask questions, but it's not just about asking questions. It's actually getting your hands dirty and getting into the meat of the issue, and suggesting things that the executive can take on board. That's what pre-scrutiny is. We get involved before the actual decision has been made. Otherwise, call-ins are useless. I mean, call-in. I've sat on several call-ins. It doesn't do anything. Every call-in I've sat on has been just an anticlimax. Nothing's happened. This is the way to do it from the outset. Get your hands dirty, get in there, and make the decision cross-party, which is very important, along with everybody else. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that we're a million miles apart from each other here, because I think, Steve, you're saying that you very much want exec members to be invited into the meeting, not in a random way. You were very clear about that. You've just said on a rota basis, but I don't know if you mean, obviously you don't mean a random rota. So you mean a rota, I don't know, based on decisions that are due, or subjects that are due to be put before the council, which seems to be what other people are calling for. So we know that something's going to be on the forward plan. So we get those executive officers to come to scrutiny. We throw around some ideas and scrutinise the decision-making process. We're not taking away from the executive. We're not taking away from the full council the decision to the right to finalise that decision, but we're scrutinising it in advance of that process. I don't think we're that far apart, and it's just giving some structure to who we invite to the meeting and at what stage in the forward planning we get them along. Have I misunderstood something there, or are we actually quite close?
In a similar way. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Icton, please.
Thank you. No, I think Councillor Fletcher's right. We're not a million miles away in what we're saying here. I think by the proposal that Councillor Sanghera put together, it doesn't take away from us the ability to dig down into the issues that we're facing. It just means that we can have a more in-depth conversation. If we've got the exec member there, if we've got something that we're not quite sure about, we need some clarification, we can ask the question. Or if we're going off on a tangent, they can say, actually, this isn't quite what it means, this isn't the wording. It means that we're not going to have the toing and froing that we would have, because we've got the people there to speak to us and answer the questions. But no, I think we're kind of on the same page here with what we want. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? No. So we have just to go along with this.
Can you?
Councillor Bond, sorry.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned that if we had a rota and something came up and we'd just seen that officer, and the officer wasn't then due for another 9 months on the rota, we would miss the opportunity to scrutinise them. I can see the reason for trying to bring people in who we've missed, who we haven't actually heard from for a long time. I can see the reason for doing that, but I just think that we need to, if we book ourselves up too far ahead, we won't have that leeway But if there is something that comes up that turns up in the forward plan, or that we find out about that we feel needs scrutinising, we still need to be able to invite people in, even if they're not on the rota.
I think the answer to that is that if there's a more pressing problem that involves a different lead member, then the lead member that was due to come in would have to stand aside to deal with a more pressing issue.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah.
Yep. Councillor Rickton, you've been already, haven't you? Yeah, on here. Right. I think we've reached a stalemate here anyway. So there's obviously no reason to vote on this as it stands now, because people are in agreement for the lead members to come in on some kind of system that as I've just said, promotes the issue that's most pressing at the time. And if there's one of the lead members was due to come in, they would stand aside if there was a more pressing issue. So if we're not going to have any more comments on it, it's something that I will say that scrutiny adopts. Is everybody happy with that?
Two lead members in
Yes.
one meeting.
Sorry, is somebody speaking?
There are two lead members in one meeting. So we're dealing with two different problems, two different items. We might want one for green spaces, and we might want one for the building control.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there should be no reason why you can't do that.
We've had two tonight.
Mm-hmm. Right. Is there any other business?
Chair, I think Councillor Mellors wanted to speak.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Mellors. Hello.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I know it's hard, like looking for hands, and we're near the end of the evening. I just wanted to clarify, really, because I know we're not a million miles away of what's been suggested, but we haven't agreed the statutory guidance yet. That's one thing. Also, what are we actually going to do with the information that we get from these lead members or officers with regards to, forthcoming plans for the forward plan? What actually is scrutiny going to be doing with those answers of the questions, and what basically are we bringing them for? I know you've said on a rota, and we can shift those around if there's more pressing issues, but actually what are we asking for?
Well, members are saying, and I've said tonight, that they don't feel included. So if you've got the person before you, the lead member and the officer, then like we ask questions, if we invite the police force in, like Nick's answered questions on what's going on, and Kat tonight, you get that opportunity to ask that personal pressing question that you've got yourself. Councillor Linda Flood next, I think. Hello. Councillor Flood. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just to say I support Councillor Dawson for pre-scrutiny. I think it's a brilliant idea. It gets everybody involved, gives us chance to ask questions of the officers or the exec. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we've got this item on the agenda about the forward plan, which is pre-scrutiny. I mean, how many of the members agree with doing that? you know, if we want to resolve something. How many agree with it? Do you want to show a show of hands on that?
Oh, how could you do it?
Sorry, who's that?
Sorry.
Right, Councillor Dawson.
Thank.
Can't hear you, Councillor Dawson.
Thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Bond had indicated she wants to come in. You just mentioned about Nick coming in and Kat coming in and obviously giving a talk, and then we've asked questions of them. Does that mean then that moving forward on this rota, we want a report to come to us that obviously said officer or said lead member actually talks to about what they've been doing? So, you know, I think that's, you know, we said we're not a million miles away. I think that's the question of, you know, if there is a certain issue that we want people to come and talk to, the request would be made from Scrutiny to say, we want you to come and talk about this particular issue. If it's just on a rota basis, would we have a report about what they've been doing within that portfolio, you know, if they've been attending meetings or what have you? That's what I'm trying to just work out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think that's something that would need to be worked out if we're going to do that. No, obviously it's got to be put before the executive anyway. But yeah, I mean that could be a suggestion if that came from the members. So, Councillor Bond.
I'm just saying that I don't want to vote for a change at the moment because I don't see that we're voting to be able to do something that we can't already do. If we want to have a rota and then put that rota to the standing item on our agenda, which appears to be our work programme, so we could say, right, on our rota, the person who hasn't spoken for the longest is this person, shall we put them on our work programme? And then the meeting could decide at that point whether it would go on the work programme. That might work, but we don't need to pass any rules in order to be able to do that. But what I don't want to do is lose our ability to agree our work programme on an ongoing basis. That worries me. So I wouldn't vote for a change at the moment.
I don't think we're changing the work programme. We're talking about whether we should pre-scrutinise things coming from the executive.
Okay.
So again, ask members what they.
Chair, can I just
yeah.
add something?
Yeah.
The statutory guidance on overview and scrutiny is due to come back to you in January, and I shall be writing a report giving you all the various options that are open to the scrutiny committee to consider. And perhaps because I do feel we're not far away from each other here, but we are going around in circles a bit. I think delay any decisions on what you wish to do, whether it relates to pre-decision scrutiny or inviting exec members till that meeting. We've already got the ability to invite exec members, and I shall extend the invite in January to Councillor Powell, as has previously been said about the core strategy. So, and that is a way of moving forward. But when it comes to pre-decision, I think wait till January, and I'll give you more information as to what that actually means. And then the committee can actually not thrash it out, but discuss it again then with all the paperwork in front of them, and they can see how it should work and then decide how they'd like to move forward. Because like I said, you're all sort of in the same ballpark at the moment, or a similar ballpark, should I say.
Right, thank you for that. Then we have to switch off the live streaming. now.
Have we finished the meeting then? Is that?
I can't remember whether it was just before or right. I'll call the meeting to a close. Thank you,
Right.
thank you everybody for coming.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
finish the live stream.